Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I knew this was going to be a popular session. Welcome. My name is Michael Jian, and I'll be your moderator for today's panel discussion. I'm formerly myself a startup operator of an AI company, and now I'm a venture capital investor at Solasta Ventures, which is a San Francisco-based frontier tech investing venture capital firm that focuses on enterprise AI and robotics. So I'm particularly excited about today's conversation with our distinguished guests. Would like to keep this conversation informal and relatively conversational. And towards the end, we'll leave a few minutes to take questions from the audience. So without further ado, please let me say a few words about our guests. So Dr. Weini Zhang is Associate Professor of Accounting at Chun Kong. Oh, congratulations. Professor at Chun Kong Graduate School of Business in Beijing. His research interests include financial analysis, corporate disclosure, investor relationship management, corporate governance, internet platform business, and strategic financial management. He also works with Development Research Center of the State Council of China and the Energy Fund of the US on research projects. Professor Zhang has advised many of China's leading AI companies and helped over 100 companies in China implement AI in their organizations. Dr. Anindya Ghosh is the Heinz Riel Chair Professor of Business at the Stern School of Business at NYU, where he holds a joint appointment in the Technology Operations and Statistics and Marketing departments. Any promotions to talk about? No? Okay. Having been recognized as one of the top management thinkers most likely to shape the future of organizations and a top 1% researcher for their influence in their fields, Professor Ghosh is a global expert in technology, data, and data transformation, and has done in-depth work in recent years on AI transformation for several dozens of companies around the world. So with our distinguished guests, we'll be discussing the topic of, for our session today, Digital Silk Road versus Silicon Valley, China's innovative drive and the US tech rivalry, which comes at a very fascinating moment. On one side, we've seen China move at breakneck speed, already 230 million generative AI users as of last year in less than 2 years, and firms like DeepSeek and Alibaba pushing into AI models and chips that just a few years ago seemed to be out of reach. On the other hand, US continues to lead in foundational research, cutting-edge large models, and AI chip design. Now, this rivalry isn't just about technological achievement and capability. It's about different philosophies of innovation and approaches to it. An engineering-driven state pushing scale at speed versus a market-driven ecosystem that prizes foundational research and entrepreneurial creativity. What we'd like to explore in the next 50 minutes is how these contrasting models are shaping business, policy, and the global digital order. Now, I thought we'd spend the first half of the session focusing on the adoption of AI in organizations, so transformation of AI in companies and organizations, and then focus the second half of the session on the innovation side of AI. So we'll talk about some leading edge AI innovations and things of that nature. So, so let's start diving in. Let's see, so transformation. So talking about the adoption side of AI, which is the only justification in the end for the enormous cost that we've been investing in on the innovation side of AI. Earlier this year, DeepSeek, a Chinese company, stunned markets because it was developed at a fraction of the cost of Western rivals. And markets finally saw that it would be possible for AI to be rapidly and broadly be adopted by companies across many different industries and around the world. Even in my own experience, many of our portfolio companies have begun to talk about becoming an AI-first company in the board meetings this year. But I'd like to start by looking into what that really means. So, Professor Ghosh, let me start with you. You've done a lot of work in this area. how do you define, first of all, AI transformation for a company or for an organization? What does it mean to be an AI-first company? Does it mean that everything is automated with AI?
Thank you, Michael. So I would start by saying that we've actually published a book recently on this topic in which we actually outline the framework for what is AI first or AI adoption. Basically, the way to think about this is we have 3 layers and then we have 4 pillars. Okay, that's how I would frame it. The first layer is, at the bottom, is something called data engineering. Data engineering is the layer where essentially, almost every data set I've worked with in the last 20 years is messy, raw, it's noisy, it has a lot of missing observations, missing values. So curating the data set before you feed it into any AI algorithm is the data engineering part. Okay? And this cannot be fully automated. You still need a lot of human intervention. And so, for example, people with skill sets in Python and R and big data and cloud computing, those are the kind of skills you need in the data engineering layer. Now, once the data set has been cleaned, then it is ready to be fed into any sort of algorithm. And at that stage, we define the house of AI as something that has 4 pillars. The first pillar is what we call descriptive AI. Descriptive AI, at this stage, you're answering the question, what has happened so far? Okay? You're not imposing any models yet. You're answering a question, what has happened? And this requires skills like in data visualization. Okay? Following that, you get to the predictive question, which is what will happen next? Okay? There you need skill sets in machine learning, forecasting, data mining, etc. Following that, and the third pillar is probably the most important of all of this, is causal inference. And the idea is that you are trying to understand why something happened. Okay? And lastly, you have what we call the prescriptive AI pillar, which is what should we do after that? That requires skill sets in optimization. Okay? So the 4 stages are 4 questions, right? What has happened? What will happen next? Why did something happen? And what should we do about this? Then comes what we call the third pillar is, the third layer is the modern AI, generative AI pillar. This includes things like, you mentioned DeepSeek. DeepSeek is a fundamental example of reinforcement learning. We have generative AI, we have modern AI, we have reinforcement learning. Obviously, all of this has to be done in a very fair, transparent, equitable way so that people know why the data set that are being used, they have been debiased. There's no, the fundamental issues with all of that. Okay, so so far over the last several years, we have helped somewhere between dozens of companies, as you mentioned, closer to 70 or 80 companies adopt this framework, and then take it from there in terms of implementation, execution, et cetera, et cetera. It's not necessarily bed of roses, but the framework has a pretty solid foundation, which is why it seems to work very well.
I see. Thank you. That's a very interesting framework. It's the first time for me to hear about that. I'll come back to you on to delve more into that, but let me turn to Professor Zhang at the moment. You're currently teaching a course called Organizational Restructuring in the AI Era, and you've helped about 100 companies in China, which is very impressive in their implementation of AI platforms and applications. What organizational changes would you say are most critical when firms are adopting or implementing AI?
So, with the perspective of organization, so the fundamental questions for the organization is this. So when the organization get bigger, get larger, so even scaling, so the complexity increased exponentially. So previously, we solved these problems through 2 ways. The first way is the division of the labors plus the processes. So we just making the complex problems into the very simple problems. So we can just use the simple person to solve the simple problems, to solve the complex issues. And the second one, for the uncertain tasks, we need the good information, we need the good people, we need the talents with good information to make the good decisions. So previously, we solved this, the organizational fundamental problems with two ways. The first way is the processes. The second way is the talent density. But the AI will fundamentally change our thoughts because the AI, the capability of AI cross the expertise. So for example, the OpenAI or DeepSeek, they announced that they can solve the different problems with the different expertise in different areas. And most of the ability may be over a PhD degree. So that means the capacity of the AI is across the different expertise. That means they can occupy the different positions in the whole processes. So theoretically, so all of these processes in the company will collapse because if most of the processes is occupied by AI, then finally the organization can be automated. So, and the second way, previously we may have only one very good person, the one best person, okay, with the best practice, with the best brain, but most of our employees are not as good as well, are not as good as the best ones. But if we can accumulate the knowledge base and the best practices with the data accumulation, the data governance of all of these best people, then that means that we can generate infinite talents and increase the talent density with really, really low cost, with marginally maybe zero marginal cost. So that means we may solve the fundamental questions of the organization with the AIs. First, if you fuse all of these processes. The second one, the second is we does not need that many human beings with very high expertise because the AI can help us to do that. So finally, if a company can take these two ways and rethink how to organize the company, then maybe everything is changing.
I see. Thank you very much. So, Professor Goes, you proposed a framework through which we can look at companies in terms of how an AI-first company would be built. So basically, the core ingredients of a successful AI-first company. And then Professor Zhang proposed the implications of AI and how to go about solving these complex organizational issues when adopting AI. So let me sort of combine those together and ask both of you, in your own respective experiences, what distinguished companies that successfully rewire themselves for AI from those that struggle? Maybe Professor Goes.
Sure. So first I would say, we've all heard a lot about generative AI. And in our current research, we have shown that despite all the buzz about Gen AI, in the next 2 to 3 years, most of the business value will still come from traditional AI. And so this goes back to your question about what are some of the mistakes companies are making. I see a lot of excitement and buzz about generative AI. Everybody wants to adopt it. Everybody wants to have a piece of it. But I think one of the mistakes they're making is they're not building the foundation for traditional AI, because Gen AI is essentially a layer on top of traditional AI. And so that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is, many of us have heard about agentic AI, right? So the idea is that a lot of the automation that is going to happen through agents, okay? But here's the problem. So this summer, I went around different parts of the world working with, advising, consulting a few companies. And what I noticed is everybody wants to, again, get on that bandwagon of agentic AI, but they have not done the fundamental work required, which is coding the workflows, okay? So you can't have an agent unleashed in your organization without coding the workflows. This goes back to 30 years ago when SAP first came from Europe and said, we're going to digitize everything. What they realized is that only those companies who've invested in the basic foundational digitization can adopt SAP. And so I think that's the second mistake I see people making. They're jumping on agentic AI without coding the workflow. So Don't expect 70% of the workflow should still come from traditional AI, and code the workflows before you jump into agentic AI.
Interesting.
First, I agree with Professor Goss's viewpoint. I just add some of my points here. So first, I think there are 5 elements in the whole transition. Okay, so first one is the prompt. So everybody need to know how to ask the good questions to the AI. Otherwise, so they cannot give you the good answers. The second one is the AI tools powered by the powerful AI, large language model, the generative AI. And the third one is knowledge base. So everybody should have its own knowledge base, and the company should have its own knowledge base as well. That can be the core competence of the whole company in the future. And the fourth one is the digital employees based on the agent, because the agent is, if we are talking about the structure of agent is simple. It's like one large language model engine plus one knowledge base plus one prompt. Then you have an agent. So that means when we have an employee, why do we need to hire an employee? Just because we need to have his expertise and experience. So the expertise can be replaced by the AI engine, and the experience can be replaced by the knowledge base. Then that means we can have an army of digital employees in the company. And finally, the fifth one is the automated workflow. Because workflow is also easy. It's based on the processes plus the digital employees. So first, this is the final elements we should finally have. And I think the most difficult part here is the data governance and the documentation of the processes. If you ask me what can be the successful tips, I would say, just based on all of my consulting experience, I think maybe 60 to 70% of the budget will goes to cleaning and govern the data. Maybe 20% will goes to the management change, and maybe only 10% goes to the AI technology or AI deployment. So, but if a company would say, okay, I really so like I like the AI technology so much, I would like to spend maybe 80% of my budget over there, then maybe the garbage in, then garbage out. So just, I completely agree with Professor Goss's viewpoint that the data governance is the precondition for us to run everything.
If I may just interject a little bit, as you were both speaking, something came to mind. So, for example, we talked a lot about workflows, and then the 5 elements that Professor Zhang suggested, which I think, in a way, they're all part of a larger AI workflow, if you will. And if I think about workflows in a corporation or in a company in general, it's kind of like equivalent to a habit in a person. It's the way that you do things. And that depends a lot on the context, the culture of the company, the culture of the people, the way that we were educated, the way that we work. And so, for example, I mean, this is not necessarily related to just AI, but if you think of how enterprise software is used in organizations, there's a huge difference between, let's say, Korean companies. I deal a lot with Korean companies. You tend to have horizontal enterprise software applications like Excel or Microsoft Word, and that'll be sufficient for most of the things that we do. Whereas if you go to America, an employee may be dealing with 30 to 40 different, very granular, highly vertical tools and applications. And I think that all stems from cultural differences. So it's a long way to ask the next question, which has to do with the context and the the cultural, economic, demographic, what have you, all the context that surrounds a particular country or a company. So I suppose it goes without saying that when it comes to AI transformation, we can't apply a general playbook to all companies and expect it to work uniformly well. You have to take all of the different contexts into account. So maybe I'll start with Professor Zhang first this time. I'm curious to hear about your view on how these subtle differences might affect how firms in China transform themselves around AI compared to maybe how the ones in the US or outside of China might transform themselves.
This is a very good question. So the first problem here in China is this, okay? So this kind of two flips of the one coin. On one hand, Chinese companies developed very, very rapidly in the last 30 years. So in almost all of these areas. So yes, we have made a great achievement, but at the same time, we still have some very significant cost to pay. That is in order to grow very fast, so the informal relationship in the company's management is over the documented processes. So most of our knowledge is stored in the brain of the senior workers. Does not stored in our system. Does not stored in the ERP. So that means we may spend much more time and much more expenditures to clean our data, to make our data more powerful. So for example, I have a client from insurance company. It's a huge company. So originally we just thought we maybe have only 100 core processes. But finally, when we just try to map them down, we found that at least we have 500 core processes. And 80% of them is different from what we documented. So that means we have to redo most of the documented process. Because if we don't do that, then we may not be able to have the workflow. Because the AI is not intelligent to tell us you can automatically to do something. We have to tell AI to do that. But if we don't have an affirmative, certain task for the AI, then it can play it in anywhere. So that means most of the Chinese companies are growing very fast, but we have to pay the cost. And at the same time, we have to apply our AI deployment in all of our companies as well. And that means we have to fly. We have to fix the flight. We have to fix the plane when we fly it. So that's much more difficult. And from my little experience in the U.S. companies, the data governance is much better. And the process, documentation is much better than the Chinese companies. Then that means in the initial stage, okay, the implementations of the U.S. companies is much easier than in China. Then that means in any vertical industries, when the data is available, then we just plus the API of the large language model, then they can very easily create the values. Then that's why the startups in the US can start from the vertical industries. It's not like China. We have to think a lot of things. So for example, I actually co-found AI companies to help the enterprises. We found that the most difficult part is not to teach them how to use AI. Is to help them to clean all of these data and processes. They spend maybe 70% of energies or effort over there. So initially we are slow. But finally, from my experience, maybe many US companies just upgrade from their legacy system. But for Chinese companies, they have more opportunity to redo everything. So they are more likely to be AI originated companies instead of the AI upgraded companies. Yes.
I see. Professor Zhang just shared a lot of insights, actually, insights and lessons learned. Professor Goes, similar question for you. Given that a lot of our audience here is probably from companies outside of either the US or the China, are there any lessons they may be able to take based on what you've seen in US companies or other companies around the world in how they're integrating AI into their strategy and operations?
Sure. I think one way of describing the potential for, let's say, companies in Korea would be to take a look at how the AI tech stack looks like today. Okay? And this is agnostic to US and China. So the AI tech stack has 4 different components. Okay? The very first layer is the AI application layer. The second layer is AI foundational models like large language models. The third layer is cloud computing. And the fourth layer is semiconductor chips. Okay? So any AI-driven economy or AI organization will have to have a placeholder for each of these. Okay? So now the question is, within these 4 layers, where do, if you are someone who is part of an AI company in South Korea, right? Let's say Samsung, for example, where in those 4 layers do you see a role for yourself? Clearly, semiconductor chips, they are doing a great job there. Is there a role in cloud computing? Is there a role in, for example, building foundational models? Obviously, there's a lot of really interesting AI application companies in South Korea. And I've been coming here for almost 15 years, 3-4 times a year. So I've worked a lot with companies here. And I see some great innovation in the AI application layer. I see great innovation in the semiconductor layer. It's in the middle where I think there are more opportunities. So the question is, are there companies here who can take foundational models and not just piggyback on the top of what is happening in the US and China, but build foundational models of their own? And not just foundational for localized languages and dialects, but truly foundational that, let's say countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia, if you look at which parts of the world companies and countries investing most, it's 2 countries. Okay? It is Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. They are literally throwing is a strong word, but they're actually investing billions and billions of dollars. And right now, they are at the crossroads between should we adopt the US model, which is very closed source, large language models, or should we adopt the Chinese model, which is open source models? Okay? So I was in Saudi Arabia and UAE recently this year, and when I spoke to the folks over there, they said, look, on one hand, if you can get me 90% of the value at 20% of the cost, why shouldn't I do open source and work with companies in China? On the other hand, there's another school of thought which says, no, AI has to be perfect, and so I would rather pay 100% for 100% of the value, and so I'd rather do the closed source large language model. So I think the world is right now at a crossroads, and we'll have to wait to see how things actually unfold.
Interesting. Professor Zhang, can I ask a very similar question that Professor Goes was just talking about, but let me put a sovereign AI lens on top of that. And so how should firms around the world balance reliance on their own sovereign AI capabilities versus tapping into global AI technologies such as OpenAI and NVIDIA on the US side, or DeepSeek, Alibaba, or Huawei on the Chinese side? How should we think about that?
Just based on my experience, okay, I cannot say it's correct or not. I think first, the most important effort that each company has to do is the data governance first. Okay, so they have to very well organize and build on the data, very good data platform. And the data platform is not a very specific technology. Okay, so this is kind of, I think most big companies or maybe medium company can build by themselves. Or otherwise you can rely on some the third-party platforms. So this is the first one. So you have to build your own data foundations and process foundations. And the second one is choose the best one available in your country. So you can evaluate the different, so for example, the OpenAI Anthropic, have the best closed large language model over the world. And their quality is really, really good. Okay, I think that they are the best over the world. But China have the DeepSeek, the Tongyi from Alibaba. They're almost the best in the open source large language models. So, and with the different sizes, especially Tongyi, from 1B to 7B to 16B, 32B, 200B, and 720B, and 900B. So we have the different size of the large language model. Then you can train the model by yourself to fit your own business and to fit your own positions. So to directly answer your question, I think this is a free market, okay? So the most important thing for each company have to do is to build their own platform of data. And then to get the best available large language model they can get over the world. That's it. So I don't think we need to, at this time, in the short run, to just lock yourself into any ecosystem, because this is a kind of infinite game. Maybe one day A is better, B is worse. But maybe tomorrow one is worse, B is better. So this, if everyone is on the table, and I think this is an infinite game. Yes.
Can I just add
Yeah,
something?
please.
So I agree with Professor Zhang on the data governance part, and actually that reminded me of something on this question of which way should the world go, right, between open source and closed source. So back in Dubai, there was an interesting event where a few of us were speaking. One theory proposed by, and there were some really smart people, one theory proposes for consumer level adoption, maybe we should do open source. For enterprise level adoption, maybe we should do closed source, okay? Because the cost of making errors at the enterprise level is compounding at a much higher level. Whereas, at the consumer level, there is fewer subscription, if no subscription fees, and the cost of error is low. So I can see the world bifurcating maybe temporarily that way, where consumer level applications use open source, enterprise level applications use closed source.
Right. I think that partially explains Mark Zuckerberg's sort of effort to recruit top talent for 9-digit, 10-digit salaries, because the cost of training a model in the wrong way is really large, especially as you move into the enterprise domain. And therefore, it may be even more cost-effective to offer such enormous amounts of compensation to attract top talent.
You're in the wrong business.
I am.
Let me just add just one sentence here. So first, I agree with Professor Gau's viewpoint here, and the second thing is, I think whether it is the closed source or open source, it's about only the business model. It's about I think finally, all of this, finally, not today, not tomorrow, okay, maybe in 5 or 10 years, finally, all of these models will be open sourced. It's like electricity, okay? So when we are now using electricity when we don't care who is the vendor. Finally, when, for example, the AGI, ASI comes up, so if in the future something happen like that, so we just use this intelligence as like as electricity, okay? And we don't really care who is the vendor.
And maybe that's why all the LLM companies are now focused on the layers on top of the LLM to help differentiate themselves, because LLM is fast becoming a commodity. So with that, Professor Zhang, let me go back to you. During our pre-session meeting, I think you mentioned something about, for example, just a couple of weeks within OpenAI's launch of GPT-5 just last month, companies like DeepSeek, Huawei, Alibaba all came out with news that suggests that major AI milestones are being achieved in China, whether it's about model efficiency or chip architecture or chip production capabilities. And then you suggested that the US and China might be in this ongoing infinite game playing Could you elaborate on that? What do you mean by that?
I think so. With the with the foundation of education models, okay. So maybe at this time the science and technology is stronger in the U.S., but engineering may be a little bit stronger in China because we have more engineers, and so that means if you are a good scientist or good technology guys, you can ask good questions. But for good engineer, you can answer. For any good question, you can give better answers. So with the more effective and low-cost answers. So I think for the current stage, for technology part, I think China is still following the pace of the US. But we can deploy the new technology more quickly in the larger scales. But maybe in the next 5 or next 10 years, when we learn how to do this, so maybe we can ask better questions in the next 5 or 10 years. So, but at the same time, in the US, the engineering is much better, and maybe it can be over at the current stages of China. So I think the US and China is in the infinite game. Okay, so in this area, and we cannot say who is the winner or who is the loser at any stage. Okay, so finally, I hope the collaboration is much more important than competitions for both countries.
Professor Goes, do you have anything?
Yeah, I like the last thing you mentioned, more collaboration, less competition. So we talk about this rising tide lifts all boats. I think that's the model to approach. But just sort of piggyback on what you were saying, if you had to summarize the situation today, I agree with Professor Zhang that the US leads China on original AI research, but China leads US in actual AI implementation. Okay? And you need both. So in many ways, we see two countries with very strong strengths in particular areas and opportunities in the other areas. And I don't see that process changing. And I think this gets to your question about maybe a little bit of futuristic, which is, look, US, we are basically a democracy, right? So we have to work in a certain way where people's opinions, people's voices have to be heard, regulatory compliance issues have to be addressed. We have to listen to venture capitalists like yourself. We have to listen to the consumer angle as well. So the reason the US went closed source, or the reason we did a lot more of AI research is our cultural ethos is baked in that way. Mm-hmm. And that's not going to change. So I think what we have to figure out is, given that these two countries will have two different mechanisms going forward, what are the opportunities where we can actually engineer sort of, minds and hearts so that people collaborate? And see, because the synergies, 1 + 1 is not going to be 2. 1 + 1 is going to be more than 2. And that is what I think the leaders in the countries have to realize and enable this synergistic collaboration. And we used to do that before geopolitical forces change everything. Correct. We used to do a lot of that. I worked with many Chinese tech companies. I used to go 6 times a year to China. I loved it. That has stopped, unfortunately, but hopefully it'll start.
I suppose, right, I feel the same. Yeah. And I think that the reason that this session is very popular is because those types of positive trends seem to be slowing, if not stopping, unfortunately. So let's talk a little bit about policy for a minute then. There are obviously contrasting approaches to technology policy, which affects innovation and entrepreneurship. Perhaps in the US, we have a more of a reactive approach, for example, through antitrust laws or export controls, whereas in China, you have a set of policies that are more highly directive, if you will. So for example, China set up what's called the National AI Champions a few years ago, which consists of companies like Baidu or Alibaba, Tencent, that were designated by the Chinese government to lead Chinese AI. So maybe going back to Professor Goes, how do you think these contrasting policy regimes would shape or affect entrepreneurship and maybe even risk-taking differently over time in these two different regions or powerhouses?
Sure. So, as I was briefly mentioning to you on the way here, the last 5 years I spent working on the antitrust cases in the US as a testifying expert for Google, Meta, and some of these companies, where the government in both European Union and the US has been trying to break up these companies. And part of our job was to argue using like data and machine learning why they shouldn't be broken up. So really recently, Google won the monopoly case against the US government. Google will no longer be broken up, right? So the DOJ, US government lost that case. We were part of the Google team in that case. The one thing I would say is going forward, I can already see that, that 4-layer AI tech stack I described to you, applications, LLM, cloud computing, semiconductor chips. We see 4 or 5 companies, the same companies in each layer, okay? So Microsoft, Amazon, Google, these companies are there in every layer. So right now, the US government, when thinking about antitrust policies, is saying, should we stop this process where the same 4 or 5 companies dominate each layer? To me, that conversation is important, but I don't think it should progress to a place where, for example, the European Union, I feel that they are regressing back. They have a lot of smart people in AI, but because of over-policing and over-regulation, they are going back in time. And so personally, I wouldn't want the US to be in that situation where we over-regulate. So we should allow innovation first, regulation after, not like the EU. EU is regulation first, maybe innovation after.
Right, US is more like do what you want until you're told not to. Whereas everywhere else in the world is more like, don't do it until I tell you it's okay to do so. And I think that gets reflected in innovation in AI and other things. Professor Zhang, what do you think? Do you agree?
Yeah, first, I'm not an expert in the international policies. Okay, I'm not a regulation decision makers, but I can just describe some of my observations in China. So first, I think AI is an infrastructure. Okay, so it should be applied in almost all of the phases. It's kind of the basic foundation for the whole economic and industrial developments of this country. So that's why the government is trying to organize, to synergize the different powers and the different the efforts from the different companies to try to build the infrastructures. And the last successful case is about the energy. So we try to transform our the fossil energy to the green energy. So that somehow after 20 years, okay, we can observe it is successful now. And I think this is what the Chinese government would like to have, is we build the good infrastructure for all of this country that everybody can use. It does not really belong to any economic power, something like that.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? Professor Zhang, do you think that there's something that Silicon Valley or maybe the Western world misunderstands about the Chinese innovation model or policy?
Maybe. But to be honest, I don't know what they really think.
I can speak to that. I'll tell you. So I'll say that because I have worked with companies both US and China, I think the biggest misconception we as Americans have is everything out there is copy and paste. It's not true at all. So it's not all imitation. There's a lot of innovation that's happening, original innovation that's happening in China. And I think that perception over time has mitigated. But I still worry as Americans, we still think, oh, all the innovation is happening in the West and nothing's happening in the East. And I totally disagree with that, partly because of my own experience, having seen firsthand some terrific innovation, original innovation. In fact, that's something that we have also copied. So that is the number one misconception.
I see. Okay. We just have under 5 minutes until the end of the session. I want to leave enough time for questions from the field. But my last question for both of you, Professor Goes and Zhang, what are the implications for global firms who now are finding themselves more and more being in between these two large and advanced AI powerhouses? If you were advising a multinational CEO outside of those two regions, what would be your top recommendation for navigating the digital Silk Road versus Silicon Valley?
So maybe, I'm originally from India, so I'm Indian American, so I'll give you the Indian perspective, right? So it's between US and China. My number one recommendation, or one of the recommendations to companies in India, or the government of India, was recently that, look, I don't think you need to choose now between the US model or the Chinese model, the closed source or open source, implementation of research versus adoption, etc. I think you should look for, in that 4-layer stack, right? Is there innovation opportunities for Indian companies to build original LLM models, foundational models? I don't think India should go into semiconductor chips. That's very CapEx heavy. I don't think we should get into like cloud computing, that's CapEx heavy. But we can probably do a better job in, for example, original foundational models in LLMs, okay? And applications. So I think maybe keep your eyes and ears open. Don't take a decision now, just like the Saudis and the UAEs are doing. They're saying, okay, maybe for consumer applications, we're going to do open source, enterprise closed source. 90% of the cost at 20% of the quality, 90% of the quality at 20% of the cost is good enough. That's the same advice I shared with friends and the government in India.
Dr. Zhang?
Okay, yes. Actually, I have several multinational clients here, and my advice is directly like this. We have 3 stages. Okay, the first stage, you have to convert yourself as an AI-driven company or AI-driven organization just based on all of these 5 elements that we have talked. And the second thing is because your digital employees is taking the jobs, so that means many of your services and products can be initiated and driven by the AI. Then that means you can start selling the AI-driven product in your business area. Okay, so this is the second stage. Okay, you convert yourself as the AI-driven company, and the second, you selling the AI product. And the third one is, since you are the leading companies in this area, that means that many of your followers would like to learn from you. Then you can, maybe in the future, you can create something like the App Store in the Apple. Okay, I can sell my digital employees. I can sell my automated workflows. So all of these entrepreneurs would be very easier to get off them and to assemble them and to start a new business. Then in the future, maybe the company itself is the infrastructure or the foundation of the whole development of this whole industry. So if you can just achieve the stage 3, then that means you yourself is this industry.
Thank you very much. I'd like to take a moment to thank the organizers for this event, and like to thank you, the audience, for your engagement today. And finally, thank our distinguished guests, Professor Zhang and Professor Goes. Can we have a round of applause, please?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your insights.
감사합니다.